I have a fun little video planned here today for you guys for our spooky video of the week, and I want to do one on Morghasts. This is going to be kind of a short form video. I'm going to do this just like I would for any other legendary lore speculation type video. We're going to talk about the lore blurb from the Nagash book that came out with End Times, the very first book. So we're going to read the exact lore blurb from that book. Then we're going to go through the rules of the two variants of the Morghasts, the Morghast Harbinger and the Morghast Archive. So this will be a fun little quick video. Right now I'm going to be landing in LAX, coming back from, well, actually not right now this minute, but 12 hours from now, I'll be landing in LAX after our London trip for the Everchosen. So I wanted to have some content out for you guys to devour. A little bit more of a short form one compared to last week's Vampire Counts army list, but hopefully this one will be very enjoyable for you guys. So let's jump in on the lore for the Morghasts, Heralds of the Accursed One. The origins of the Morghasts lie deep in the past, long before the time of Sigmar. Nagash, having failed to claim Nehekhara through open war, had visited plague upon the kingdoms of the south, to weaken his enemies in preparation for war. Thousands perished, and all the time Nagash awaited the proper moment to renew his assault. The great necromancer's pride would not allow him to suffer another defeat, but nor did he want his victory over King Alcatazar to be delivered from a distance. Yet Nagash was not the only one who gazed down upon Nehekhara's plight. Petra, god of light, had watched powerless as plague had ravaged the kingdoms of the sun. Petra burned to loose the fires of the sun upon Nagash, to smite him out of existence with a blazing column of light. Alas, like many of the old gods, Petra's ability to intervene directly in mortal affairs had receded as the dark gods of chaos had grown in power. But he was not entirely helpless. Petra mustered his winged heralds, the Hammerai, and sent them to destroy the great necromancer. Nagash's power was such, however, that even these divine warriors could not slay him. For 40 days and nights, the Hammerai battled Nagash atop the spires of Nagashazar. But neither sun-forged steel nor the light prevailed. As dawn rose on the 41st day, Nagash stood victorious amidst the ruin of Petra's host. As the sun flared an angry red with Petra's impotent rage, Nagash looked upon the corpses of the Hammerai and saw opportunity. When last he had marched upon Nehekhara, his plans had been undone by the cowardliness of the vampires. The Nightwalkers had proven poor lieutenants, but now the great necromancer saw the chance to create more effective servants. Drawing upon the power that was his to command, Nagash reshaped the fallen Hammerai into worthy emissaries. At his command, bones twisted and bronzed skin sloughed away. Feathers that had once been gleaming gold beneath the sun's rays rotted to nothing, leaving only membranous and leathery tatters behind. By the time the final incantation had been uttered, the Hammerai were ossified parodies of their former selves, remade in an image abhorrent to the gods, but greatly pleasing to Nagash. Whatever ruin Nagash had wrought upon the bodies of the Hammerai, their minds he left intact. He had witless servants aplenty. What he needed were sentient vassals to lead his armies forth. He wiped away their loyalty to Petra, replacing it with undying servitude to him alone. The remade Hammerai would not fail their master as the vampires had, for they felt neither fear nor arrogance. Thus were the Morghasts born. Soon after, Nagash entered Nehekhara in triumph. The Morghasts came with him. They fought mostly in wing bands of anything between 2 and 20, though the annals of Khemri recount how a legion of 300 fought as bodyguard to Nagash at the Battle of Ashkaran. Wherever the Morghasts fought, there were the bloodiest battles of that campaign. The Morghasts had no command of sorcery, but so suffused with death magic were they that their mere presence urged the dead to rise. Even without this, the humans would have stood no chance against the Morghasts. For though the creatures now serve the darkness rather than the light, they still possess the might of demigods. Their swords and glaives, fashioned long ago on Petra's solar forge, now blazed with the spirit energies of the slain. The souls trapped within, driven to drag others to share their fate. The sick and wasted remnants of Alcatazar's army were swept aside, and Nagash at last had his victory. In wake of his triumph, Nagash began his great ritual to raise the Nehekharan dead as an army fit to conquer the world. Desiring that the Morghasts would again serve as his heralds, he sent most south to Nehekhara, ready to join the ranks of the newly risen dead. A few he sent north, the better to hasten that conquest. That invasion never came. The Skaven brought about Nagash's murder, and with the great necromancer's passing, the Nehekharans he had animated broke free. Following their master's final instructions, the Morghasts attempted to assert their will over the Desert Kings, but were overcome. In victory, the Nehekharan kings, unable to find a ritual to unmake the remains, sealed the Morghasts' bones in obsidian tombs deep beneath the sands, and laid curses upon the stones so that they would never awaken. Those Morghasts that had gone north fared better for the time. Their armies of the dead growing with each step, the Morghasts brought the gift of oblivion to the scattered tribes. However, without Nagash, the magics that empowered the Morghasts ebbed away, seeping into the ether as blood from a wound. One by one they collapsed and did not rise. The greatest of their number, the Archai, the Nagash's elite guard, who had been fused from the mightiest of Petra's heralds, felt the waning draw nigh. They bade their minions forge even-wrought armor to channel the magic of the world into their accursed forms. Most of the Morghasts, fixated upon war against Nagash's enemies, did not notice their growing enfeeblement until it was too late. Centuries passed. The Morghasts were all but forgotten, the subject of legend. Prospectors and explorers stumbled upon Morghasts' remains amidst the ruins of fortress crypts, watched over by sightless skeletons and worshipped by tribes of ghouls. The Morghasts became curiosities, remnants that no scholar could fully explain. Over the centuries, many necromancers paid handsome sums or risked their wretched lives to reclaim such cadavers, only to meet with frustration with each failed attempt at resurrection. It would have provided little consolation had they known that the failure was not theirs, but due to magic fading from the world through the continuing efforts of the elves. Indeed, when Nagash returned from the time of Sigmar, even he found the magics of that era too thin to sustain a Morghast's demigod spirit, and so looked to the mortal dead, such as the warlord Krell, to serve in their place. Only now, in the hour of Nagash's third and final resurrection, when the power of the dark gods waxes and the skies burn with the stuff of raw magic, are the Morghasts beginning to awaken. In Nehekhara, there is a hammering on the walls of long-buried tombs. Beneath the mountains, bones reknit before the astonished eyes of wretched worshippers. Skeletal wings darken the skies, and ungodly weapons shriek with joy at the prospect of stealing new souls. Only Nagash's closest lieutenants can command them. Only the mightiest heroes of the mortal race have the power to defeat them. Where they tread, the living perish, and the dead awaken. The Morghasts are rising, and they are the heralds of death. The Morghasts brought a lot of really cool, awesome things to the end times. Remember, this is the first book of the end times, Nagash, the very first book, where everyone was pretty much thinking, oh man, this is going to be such an exciting foray into Warhammer Fantasy battles. We can't wait to watch the story evolve. Little did they know, or me included in that we would be up for 4 books or 3 books of just being bent over the barrel. But that's neither here nor there. The Morghasts still remain, in my opinion, some of the coolest models to come out of end times. With that, you get stuff like the Storm Fiends, you get Thanquol and Bone Ripper redone in a whole different way, the Glotkin. There's a lot of actually really cool kits from the end times. So, I mean, the end times itself aside, you do get some really awesome models. And Morghasts seem to have been the kind of prototype for what we now have in the Osiarch Bone Reapers that have just been released by Games Workshop. But how did the Morghasts translate into a Total War Warhammer? Well, for one, let's just kind of hit this one on the head. I don't think Morghasts are going to come in Total War Warhammer 2. I don't think that we would see a Nagash Legion or an Undead Legion with Nagash at the head of it until Total War Warhammer 3. And in then, I think that's when we would see Morghasts. Now, Morghasts have 2 different delineations, like I was saying earlier. Morghast Harbingers, or like you heard from the lore, Morghast Archai. That's Archai. Sorry, that could be a different pronunciation, but I'm going with Archai. Now, the Morghast Harbingers were a special choice, and you could field them in either a Vampire Count's army or an Undead Legion army. Remember, Undead Legion combined both Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings during the end times. And they had a pretty beefy stat profile. 5 weapon skill, 5 strength, 5 toughness, 4 wounds, 3 attacks. They were pretty good. They were 80 points a model, so they were pretty steep, but their unit size was only 2+. Now, they are a monstrous infantry, and how would I see them converted to a Total War Warhammer formula? Well, in my opinion, I think with Total War Warhammer 3, when we take a look at some of the bigger units, like the demons and how they have access to so many large creatures, right? When we take a look at Chaos Dwarves and they have the Kadai or whatever they're called, the basically the possessed creatures of the Chaos Dwarf army. And we look at other portions of Kislev with their Bear Cav and so on and so forth. This might not be the typical monstrous infantry size unit. Even if we're taking a look at Ogre Kingdoms, having everything that size maybe isn't the way to go about it. Maybe they're going to have a smaller size monstrous infantry unit that reflects how they were in tabletop with the 2+ unit size. But again, you know, at the same time, they could just make this the standard. What is it? 12 unit model, or a 12 model count unit, and that would work just fine. I mean, nothing says in this book that they have to be this many. I mean, Crypt Horrors in the book were 3+, so maybe that's how they're going to adapt it across to Total War Warhammer, and they've already just kind of said, hey, to hell with what the unit size requirement is, we'll apply to our formula, and I think it would work just fine. The difference between the Morghast Harbinger and the Archai is their weapon loadout. So they both have hover, which is not necessarily fly. I can't remember 100% the rules for hover. It wasn't like a full 12 inches. I think it was something like 8 or 10, but it wasn't the full big shebang. On top of it, though, they have Killing Blow, they cause terror, and they're undead. So Killing Blow, we've seen this interpreted as anti-infantry when we take a look at the Grave Guard. But for the Morghast Harbingers, they've got 2 hand weapons. So the way that I look at these guys is anti-infantry and AP coming out of them. Now, they do, or I'm sorry, the other ones have even wrought armor, so I won't talk about that yet. We'll get there. But they have Heralds of the Accursed one. So here's how I kind of think of this ability. In tabletop, basically, with this special rule, any friendly undead units within 12 inches of the unit of Morghasts doesn't suffer a wound because of unstable. So unstable and crumbling didn't have as much of an effect because you had your Morghast. Well, unstable didn't. So the way I kind of look at this is, what if these were kind of like the aspiring champion unit that we get with Chaos? Not simply a leadership bonus, but something that can prevent your army from crumbling in the event that you lose your lord. And that adds a little bit of staying power. Like you heard about in the lore how these guys essentially are responsible for drawing the undead out of the ground just by their mere presence. So I think that'd be a really cool way to kind of give that homage. Or they kind of do something where they give regeneration to the undead around them to pay a little bit of a respect to the way the lore words it of them bringing more undead back. Because we don't have crumbling and unstable in the conventional way that we had it in tabletop, this might be how they kind of translate it into Total War Warhammer. Now for the Archai, these guys are different. They don't have 2 hand weapons and heavy armor. They have halberds and even wrought armor. And even wrought armor is simply a higher weapon or armor save. But the way I kind of think about this is, I think that the Archai should have an innate missile resistance as a result from the even wrought armor. I mean, it's kind of how you didn't have a special save for ranged attacks unless you had something in their profile that said they have a 5-up armor save against ranged attacks, and that was very rare. But you didn't have a specific ranged missile resistance or anything like that like you have in Total War Warhammer. So even wrought armor, I look at as either a ward save, a physical resistance, or simply just a missile resistance to give them a little bit more staying power on the field. We don't have really a giant delineation between like heavy armor and even wrought armor in the game outside of an actual armor value. So maybe these guys actually do have a higher armor value than the Harbinger variant. But with their halberds, I picture them as an anti-large AP model that is going to be helping out with the undead around them, either from a leadership standpoint, an unstable crumbling standpoint, or simply an overall regeneration aura. But that kind of concludes our little discussion here on the Morghasts. I just kind of wanted to have a fun little discussion about these guys because they're really awesome. They're some of the best things to come out of the end times, and they've kind of made their translation to Age of Sigmar pretty well because I think they influenced heavily the Bone Reaper or Osiarch Bone Reapers. When you take a look at the motif of these guys, you see that same kind of repeating not Lemlar, but repeating sheet or plates of metal on the shoulders, on the van braces, and so on and so forth. So we get that same kind of look with the new Age of Sigmar OCR Bone Reapers. So I think that these guys had a very important part to play in the overall, I guess you could say, longevity of Warhammer Fantasy and how it has become Age of Sigmar. But I hope you enjoyed this video here today. It is a little bit different. Usually we do a lore in this style, but I really wanted to talk about the Morghasts and give you guys some lore on them because they're a really cool and a really fun thing from the end times. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.